Okay, it's finally time to catch up and do Kuf Chaf Dalad Amud Aleph, the long-awaited missed Amud from Sukkot. Let's do it. Okay, so 124a, we're up to the Mishnah. And it's right towards the end of the narrow lines. It's on 124a2 in the arch roll. Let's begin. All utensils are allowed to be used out of necessity or not out of necessity. Well, let's define what that means. In the Gemara, Nechemia has a rule that, when it comes to regular utensils like a fork, you're only allowed to use it for the fork's function. You can't move it for any other reason. Whereas the Chachamim, the Tanakama in this Mishnah, say no, a fork is a mutter utensil. I'm allowed to use it I'm allowed to just move it around. I don't have to have any particular need for it. Certainly I'm allowed to move it around, okay? So the Gemara is going to get into a little bit more detail. I shouldn't have even said so much because we'll see the different opinions. What is the meaning of in the Tanakama who said that all utensils can be used for purpose and not purpose? So we'll see two opinions. Amar Rabba says, Litzorach. What does it mean, Litzorach? Gufo. Something to use primarily, meaning we're talking about a fork, let's say. I'm allowed to use it for the sake of its use. Shalo Litzorach. What does it mean that I'm using it for not for a purpose? I'm allowed to move the fork to use its place. Whereas when it comes to something which is primarily used for prohibited work, like a hammer, Litzorach Gufo in, Litzorach Mekomolo. I'm allowed to use the hammer for breaking nuts, but I'm not allowed to move it for its place. And then Rabbi Nechemia said, I cannot move it even for its own, I can only move it out of necessity, but not out of not necessity, is coming to say that a fork cannot be moved for its place. Okay? Amalei Rava disagrees with this. He says, when you say for the sake of its place, is that not out of necessity? Again, the Mishnah said all utensils can be moved for necessity and not necessity. And Rabba said, not necessity means I need its place. Rava says, what do you mean? If I need its place, that's a necessity. Rava says, this is the way to read the Mishnah. Litzorech, and this is the way we pass it, by the way. Litzorech, a utensil that is leheter, meaning like a fork. Litzorech means that means I'm allowed to move a fork, okay, a regular utensil, but whether I need it to eat or I need it because it needs its place. Shalo litzarach, what does it mean when the Tanakama says I'm allowed to move it not out of necessity? That's to protect it. Let's say the fork is outside and it's going to get ruined because it's going to get rusted. I'm allowed to move it inside because I don't need the fork. I don't need to place the fork. I'm just doing it to protect the fork. However, when it comes to something which is primarily used for prohibited work, for the sake of its use, for the sake of its place, yes, but not from the sun to the shade. So again, Rabbi Nechemia would come along and say, Litzorech, I'm allowed to move the excuse me. However, when it comes to a prohibited activity, then I'm not allowed to move a prohibited activity like a hammer to protect it from the elements. Rabbi Nechemia come along and say, I'm allowed to move a fork for its own use, to use it to eat something, and I'm allowed to use it to move because I need its place, but I'm not allowed to move a fork from outside into inside. Okay, so that's Rava's opinion. Yasiv, Rav Safar, and again, this is the way we rule. That means if you have a davar shlach leheter, you have a permitted item and it's sitting outside, then I'm allowed to according to Rava, which is how he paskin, I'm allowed to move it inside because I'm afraid it's going to get ruined. I'm allowed to move it. If it's davar shlach leisser, like a hammer outside, I'm afraid it's going to get ruined. I cannot move it. If I have a hammer on a seat which I want to sit, I'm allowed to move it. If I have a hammer and I want to break a nut with it, I'm allowed to move it. Fine. Okay. Yasser of Safar, a bunch of Rabbanim were sitting together. According to Rabba, his opinion of Rabbi Nechemia, who said that a permitted utensil like a fork is only allowed to be moved when I need it. When we finish eating after a meal, how do we take the bowls off the table? I don't need it anymore, right? So we need to have a graf shel. Okay, so we say that the reason you're allowed to move it is because it's no different than a vessel that's meant for that's filled with excrement. Okay, there's a special dispensation when it comes to muksa that the Rabbanan said if something is stinky, if something is or off-putting, and it's sitting in your house, you're allowed to move it because they permitted you to move it in such a case. Okay, so it's here too. When you finish eating, it's granted it's not excrement, which is the original dispensation, but it's something which is empty bowls on the table. It's pasnish. It's just not nice, so you're allowed to move it off the table. Rabba lemar aliba de Rabbi Nechemia. Honey, The same question. Abaye asked this to Rabba. Amrle, Rav Safra Chavin Tagmar, our colleague Rav Safra already explained this. It's no dirty dishes are similar to a vessel used for excrement, and if you're allowed to move them off the table, and that's why everyone does that. Abai asks Rava. Again, Rava was the more lenient view, the view that we go with. Madocha, a mortar in which garlic is usually crushed. If it contains garlic, it's allowed to move it on Shabbos. But if it does not have garlic in it, it can't be moved. Now, why can't it be moved? So again, Rabbah could say that this is a case where a person only needs its place and you're not allowed to move it, according to him. So when it says you're not allowed to move it, it means it's sitting outside. And again, it's a klish l'achtel. The reason you can't move it is because you're not allowed to protect a utensil designated for prohibited activities. You're not allowed to take it from the sun into the shade. That you're not allowed to do. But you would be allowed to move it if you need its place. Okay, Esve, another question, same back and forth with Shavin, and Beishav and Beisil both agree that if one chopped meat on a pestle, then it cannot be moved. Now a pestle is a klish l'achtel, it can't be moved. So according to Rabbah would say you can't move it because you can't even move it for its place. What would Rabbah say? When it says you can't move it, it means you can't move it from the sun to the shade. Okay, so we have a Mishnah which seemingly contradicts both opinions. You're not allowed to support a pot with a piece of wood on Yom Tov. And so too on a door. A piece of wood on Yom Tov is a utensil which has complete permissible function, since you're allowed to use it as fuel for cooking food. And on Yom Tov you put wood into your fire to cook. You see from this Mishnah that a kli shalach leheter, cannot be taken for the sake of its use or for the sake of its place, right? This goes like nobody. So he says, no. Pass my time on there. What's the reason that you're not allowed to use the piece of wood over there to support things, and you can't move this piece of wood? Since a piece of wood is classified as something that's used primarily for prohibited activity on Shabbos. So basically what happens is the Rabbanan said there are certain things that we're going to say that if it's Asr on Shabbos, you also can't do it on Yom Tov, even though theoretically it should be permitted on Yom Tov. But since a piece of firewood is something that on Shabbos is muktzah, you also can't use it on Yom Tov. What's going on? On Shabbos it should be allowed to be moved. But on Shabbos itself, what's the principle? If you need it for its place or you need it for its function, it's permitted. So Gemara says no. The whole idea of there's a new principle that we're learning over here, that is that we said a hammer could be moved if I need its place, or I need it for a permitted function. And therefore we said, hey, what about the piece of wood? If I need it for a permitted function, and on Yom Tov the permitted function is throwing it into the fire, it should be allowed to be moved. The Gemara says no. That whole principle of a kli, davar shemlachto le'isr, is only when it's a utensil. When it's not a utensil, when it's not a utensil, you're not allowed to do so. So meaning, let's say you have a rock, and you say, I want to use this rock on Shabbos or on Yom Tov because I want to throw it at something. I want to throw it around. Isn't that a klish machla isser, and I'm now using it? The answer is no. That concept only applies for things which are utensils. When it's not a utensil, it cannot be done. Okay, the other issues with the rock, so probably wasn't the best example. Let's go further. Umiga is written and asked the Gemara, wait, where do you see make these prohibitions, these gzeros, these decrees from Shabbos to Yom Tov? Where do you ever see that? That's not Mashilin Peros Derech Aruba B'Yom Tov. You're allowed to lower produce through a skylight on Yom Tov of a loba Shabbos. Okay, so you're allowed to exert yourself by lowering produce. If let's say you have produce on top of your roof on Yom Tov or on Shabbos, and you're afraid it's going to start raining and ruin all the produce, you're allowed to put it down through the skylight. If there's a hole in the roof, you're allowed to put it down. I can't do so on Shabbos. Well, it says but don't we have a Mishnah which says you do have Gzera? Why? Because it's Ein Ben Yom Tov Shabbos El Ochel Nefesh B'Vad. That the only difference between Yom Tov and Shabbos is things that are done for Ochel Nefesh, things that are done for food purposes. Otherwise, you're not allowed to do things. Otherwise, the same rules that apply in Shabbos, same laws and muktzah that apply in Shabbos, all the same prohibitions that apply in Shabbos, even if they theoretically shouldn't be applicable in Yom Tov, we see they do. So Rabbi Yosef Lakasha, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, these Mishnayos are not a contradiction because they're really lined up with two different opinions. The Tanya we learned in the Brayso, Osov Esmenosh Naflu Bar. Let's say an animal and its offspring that fell into a pit on Yom Tov. Okay, so what's halacha? You cannot slaughter an animal and its child on the same day. Okay, so here you have an issue because the only reason to be allowed to move these animals is because you want to slaughter it on Yom Tov, right? So the problem is that you can't slaughter both animals. So what do? So you raise the first animal in order to slaughter it, then you slaughter it. And then you lower some food down to the second animal in the pit, and so it doesn't die. Rabbi Shomer, no. Rabbi Shomer says, I have a creative idea. I bring up the first animal and say, oh, I'm going to shecht it. And then you're like, I don't know if I want to shecht it. Umarim, and then you kind of like do a little shtick. And umalas hasheni, and then you bring up the second one. You say, oh, maybe I'll do the second one. And then ratzas hashochet, then you say, I'm going to do this one, I'm going to do that one, whatever it is, and you can just slaughter whichever one you want. Bottom line is, each one you do with intent to bring that one up, and therefore you got them both out. Okay, so. So basically what we see is Rabbi Yeshua rules leniently when it comes to muksa on Shabbos, exertion on Shabbos, which is what the first Mishnah said, that you are allowed to exert yourself to lower produce through a scarlet and Yom Tov and not on Shabbos. And Rabbi Eliezer rules stringently. So basically that's where we're going to line up these two Mishnahs, which seemingly were contradictory. Mimai, the Gemara says, no, wait a second, you can't necessarily make these comparisons. Still not kind of like Rabbi Eliezer Hasam El Efshel Farnasa. Maybe Eliezer ruled stringently specifically in that case because he argued that at the end of the day you could feed the second animal in the pit. It's not going to die. Okay, but in a case where let's say it's going to start raining on the roof and it's not going to be saved, maybe he would allow that, right? In other words, the only reason he was strict was because there was a way to do this which involved less work. Inami, alternatively, maybe Rabbi Shua only had lenient opinion there because it's possible to make the shtick. But when there's no possible shtick, maybe he wouldn't allow it. No, the way to line up the Mishnah is to say that one Mishnah, the more stringent Mishnah is Rabbi Shammai, the more lenient opinion is Rabbi Hillel. It's not Rabbi Shammai Omrim, because we see they discuss this. Rabbi Hillel says, Beishamai says, Beishamai says on Yom Tov you're not allowed to take a child, a lulav, or a Torah scroll into the public domain. Beishamai allows it. So similarly, Beishamai would allow a person to lower the produce through a scarlet on Yom Tov. It says, so wait a second. All we see from here is Hotzah. Beishamai is being strict about Hotzah. Hotzah is Daraisa. What we were talking about is the contradiction was about the Brisa, which was strict, was about moving something, which is a matter of muksa, which is Darabanan. So it says, at the end of the day, why is it? Where's the prohibition of moving something come from? It really is predicated on a. It's really predicated on the prohibition of transferring objects. According to many opinions, the whole institution of muktzah is based on a safeguard to ensure persons to move objects from one domain to another. And therefore, yes, if we do see Beis Shammai being machmir about hotzah, about the biblical prohibition against transferring objects from one place to another, we could assume that he would apply that same stringency when it comes to moving things, which is related. Okay, I'm going to go a tiny bit further because I'm just not sure where we stopped. Okay, and we see Rav holds like Rava. You're allowed to move a hoe in order so it doesn't get stolen. To move a hoe, a davar shlachta iser, so it doesn't get stolen. That's equivalent to moving it from the sun to the shade. That's not allowed. If you're not allowed to move it so it doesn't get stolen, we're allowed to move it for the sake of its place, right? That goes like Rava, that goes like the more lenient view of Rava. Okay, so right, so it says he said, bring the trap for Kahana to sit on. Okay, so he said you're allowed to use this klish malach l'eser as a seat. Why was he specifying? Why was he spelling this out? That it should be brought to him as a seat. Let's just say bring the trap, bring this davar shlach l'isser. Why does it say bring it as a seat? So to imply that it can only be, does not imply that it's only allowed to be used to sit on, because then it would be l'tzorach gufo, but not because you need its place. So that it does not go like Rava, that goes like Rava. So he says no, take away the trap from kahana. So basically he was saying that actually make the place available, and that is, and therefore, so basically he was saying take it away from him, and that is a case where he's saying you're allowed to move this klish machla iser l'tzorach mekomo, which is like Rava. Alternatively, hasam mecham hava, there the trap is actually being moved from the sun to the shade, and Rav therefore said, he basically made a shtick. He said, okay, really it's going to get ruined outside. He says move it inside so Rav Kahana could sit on it. All right, so that's why I had to say that there was a function over there, because if he was just going to move it inside, it would actually be usher. Okay, I think this is what we are up to. I think so. All right, we'll stop over here and we'll pick up tomorrow. That's what we're up to. Have a wonderful day.